Part 3, The Ultimate Revolution, Brave New World, Berkeley, 1962, Aldous Huxley.
A longer and longer chapter on what are called iatrogenic diseases, that is to say, diseases caused by doctors. And this is quite true, that many of the wonder drugs are extremely dangerous. I mean, they can produce extraordinary effects, and in critical conditions they should certainly be used, but they should be used with the utmost caution. But there is evidently a whole class of drugs affecting the central nervous system, which can produce enormous changes in sedation, in euphoria, in energizing the whole mental process, without doing any perceptible harm to the body. And in this sense, this represents, it seems to me, the most extraordinary revolution, that it in the hands of a dictator, these substances of one kind or another could be used in the most well, with complete, first of all, with complete harmlessness, and the result would be that I mean, you can imagine a euphoric which would make people thoroughly happy even in the most abominable circumstances. I mean, these things are possible. I mean, this is the extraordinary thing. I mean, after all, this has even been true with the crude oil drugs. I mean, as Haussmann years ago remarked apropos of Milton's Paradise Lost, he says, and beer does more than Milton can to justify God's ways to man. And beer is, of course, an extremely crude drug compared with these ones, and you can certainly say that some of the psychic energizers and the new hallucinants can do incomparably more than Milton and all the theologians combined could possibly do to make the terrifying mystery of our existence seem more tolerable than it does. So that here, I think, one has an enormous area in which the ultimate revolution could function very well indeed, an area in which a great deal of control could be used by, not through terror, but through making life seem much more enjoyable than it normally does, enjoyable to the point where, as I've said before, human beings come to love a state of things which by any reasonable and decent human standard they ought not to love. And this, I think, is perfectly possible. Well then, very briefly, let me speak about one of the more recent developments in the sphere of neurology, the implantation of electrodes in the brain. This, of course, has been done on a large scale in animals, and in a few cases it's been done in cases of the hopelessly insane. And it is, anybody who's watched the behavior of rats with electrodes planted in different centers must come away from this experience with the most extraordinary doubts about what on earth is in store for us if ever this is got hold of by a dictator. If I saw not long ago some rats in Magoon's laboratory at UCLA. There were two sets of them, one with electrodes planted in a pleasure center, and these rats were, the technique was that they had a bar which they pressed and which turned on a very small current for a short space of time, which we had a wire connected with their electrode, and which stimulated this pleasure center, which was evidently absolutely ecstatic, because these rats were pressing the bar 18,000 times a day. Apparently, if you kept them from pressing the bar for a day, they would press the bar 36,000 times on the following day. and would fall till they fell down in complete exhaustion. And they would neither eat nor be interested in the opposite sex, and would just go on pressing this power. Then the most extraordinary rats were those where the electrode was planted halfway between a pleasure and a pain center, and where evidently the result was a kind of mixture of the most wonderful ecstasy in being on the rack at the same time. And you would see the rat sort of looking at its bar and sort of saying, to be or not to be, that is the question. Finally would approach and do it. And then go back with this awful, if one can humanize or anthropomorphize, he was feeling something terribly mixed. And he would wait for quite a long time before pressing the bar again, but he would always press it again. This was the extraordinary thing. I noticed in this most recent issue of Scientific American, there's a very interesting article on electrodes in the brains of chickens, where the technique is very ingenious. You sink into their brains a little socket with a screw on it, and the electrode then can be screwed deeper and deeper into the brain stem, and you can test at any moment, according to the depth of which goes in fractions of a millimeter, of what you're stimulating. And these creatures are not merely stimulated by wire. They're fitted with a miniaturized radio receiver weighing less than an ounce, which is attached to them, so that they can be communicated with at a distance. They can run about in the barnyard, and you can press the button, and this particular area of the brain to which the electrode's been screwed down to will be stimulated, and you will get these fantastic phenomena that a sleepy chicken will suddenly get up and rush about, or an active chicken will suddenly sit down and go to sleep, or a hen will suddenly start sitting as though it were hatching out an egg, or a rooster will start fighting, or will suddenly go into a state of extreme depression. The whole picture of the absolute control of the drives is terrifying. And in the few cases in which this has been done with very sick human beings, the effects are evidently very remarkable too. I was talking last summer in England to Gray Walter, who is the most eminent exponent of the electroencephalogram techniques in England, and he was telling me that he's seen hopeless inmates of asylums with these things in their heads, and that these people were suffering from uncontrollable depression, and they'd had the electrodes inserted into something resembling evidently the pleasure center of the rat. Anyhow, when they felt too bad, they just pressed a button on the battery in their pocket, and he said the result was fantastic. The mouth would go down, would suddenly turn up, and they would evidently feel, I don't know for how long at a time, very cheerful and happy. So that here again one sees the most extraordinary revolutionary techniques which are now available to us. Now, I think what is obviously perfectly clear is that for the present these techniques are not being much used except in a purely experimental way. But I think it is extraordinarily important for us to realize, first to realize what is happening, to make ourselves acquainted with what has already happened, and then to use a certain amount of imagination to extrapolate into the future the sort of things that might happen. What might happen if these fantastically powerful techniques were used by unscrupulous people in authority? What on earth would happen? What sort of society would we get? And I think this is peculiarly important because
we've seen what sort of society we'll get if you're controlling mechanisms of thought, which propaganda does that. It's not exactly a machine pasted to your head or a screw deep inside your brain, but it might as well be, because human beings are entirely suggestible, as we've seen. And a little off topic, we are witnessing China using a weapon called TikTok in the Western world, whereby they're wielding certain narratives that if you disagree with, people are afraid to be called names. And I've yet to see Russian, Chinese, Japanese, Middle Eastern, Spanish, Argentinian men brandishing tampons in makeup and in women's clothing on TikTok. It's the Western civilizations that have been programmed and mind controlled, and if you go against it, you're phobic. And this is all propaganda. I mean, if you look to see Chinese TikTok, it's scientific children inventing, mind-blowing experiments whereby the Western civilization TikTok is comprised of men dressed like women, brandishing tampons, and healthcare workers dancing. It's all very concerning, quite honestly. But I think the latter part of this lecture is more prescient, but at the same time, let's not miss any, because Aldous Huxley was a great prophet. Whether or not he knew it at the time, he might have. I'm becoming more, I can't say sneakingly suspicious, but I'm very suspicious of something's going on with him to be so prescient in the 60s, because there was this big push of free love and all this other stuff that sort of destroyed the family unit. Like it or not, it did.